Hey now everybody, this is Professor Island. Welcome to Englit.org. Today we're talking about grammar, and specifically we're talking about punctuation. If you go to the website and you find your class, whether it's distance education or the on-campus courses, you just choose one of those courses, or you could scroll down and you'll find a direct link to the grammar section. And you'll find various aspects that I cover here and there, and certainly there are already videos on fragments and comma splices, which are the most common sentence issues. But a lot of these are actually based on this, which is problems with punctuation, and I'm going to cover both of these in this little conversation here, and hopefully it'll be pretty quick. For the most part, people understand the basic elements of punctuation. Most people understand that a period ends a sentence. It's called terminal punctuation because it ends a sentence and it separates independent clauses. And when we talk about independent clauses, we're talking about a set of words that can stand as a sentence in English. A dependent clause is one that cannot do that. You'll notice that, in fact, that periods are used throughout these pages, and most people are pretty comfortable with them. Question marks and exclamation points are also terminal punctuation, with the added notion that the question mark is an actual question. It is not the same as reporting a question. And you will note that when you ask a question, the word order is different than reporting that same thing. So, for example, if you were to say the character wanted to know what time it was, you would not put a question mark on there because you're not asking a question, you're reporting that somebody said something that happened to be a question. You'd only use a question mark if you're actually reporting that you're giving the exact words of what the character said. And since I don't want you to ask questions in your papers from yourself, the only time you would do that is when you're doing a direct quote, such as he asked what time is it, and then you'd have a question. But if the sentence was he asked what time it was, there would be a period there, not a question mark. Exclamation points are used also very rarely in any kind of analysis. Exclamation points are used when you are basically reporting exactly or quoting directly when there was an exclamation point used in one of your quotations, but nothing that you report should have exclamation points in it, because nothing that you're reporting is frankly that remarkable. You're doing literary analysis and you're talking about things that your reader, while they may find it surprising, would not be shocking. And so do not use exclamation points in your own analysis. Usually you're going to use it here rather than here. The other ones that people use or don't use often create some confusion and problems. And just to clarify what's what, let's go through these quickly. The hyphen is located on the keyboard key next to the 0 key, and basically it's a short little mark, and it is, you click on that, if you press this key that has two lines on it, a short line and a big line, without using the shift key, you'll get a hyphen, and a hyphen is used to take two words and to stick them together. And so like the word quarter ton, pickup, and half ton are all utilizing that hyphen. The dash is longer, and the dash would either be putting two hyphens together or going into your Microsoft Word symbol section and finding the one that you will find in books, which is a longer one. You'll notice that there's a significant difference between what this looks like and what this looks like, and certainly that's what the dash looks like when you put it into your essay. The dash separates words actually, and it's designed to create a pause, and so you'd have phrases like "I've known her dash" and others like her to react unpredictably. One of the things about the dash here is that you'll notice one thing. Again, it's longer than the hyphen, but also there's a space between the word and the dash and the next word, whereas with a hyphen there is no space between quarter and ton. There's the dash is right there with no spacing, but the hyphen is there with no spacing, but the dash gets spaces on either side, and so you see that this creates a pause. You also do the same thing if you just want to use two hyphens. A colon is the two dots. The colon is used to separate an independent clause, a complete sentence, from either a list or a definition that is not a complete sentence. And basically, you would say, for example, if you said he dressed as a dandy, which is a sentence, and then you gave me the description, you would simply use a colon here. People create fragments when they put a period here or a semicolon here, but especially when they put a period here, and then what follows is simply a list, and that's what you use a colon for. In this case, we have a definition here. She wrote an anecdote, a colon, a brief personal experience illustrating her point. This phrase defines this word. And essentially, you are using the colon to separate this fragmentary sentence or phrase that describes one of the words in this sentence. Quotation marks, you'll be using a lot of quotation marks in this class. Quotation marks are specifically used to show us words that you're borrowing from somebody else. I do not want you to use them for euphemisms. And understand that most of what you're doing in a class like this anyway is fairly direct, dry analysis, and so you wouldn't be using slang anyway unless you're quoting somebody, and if you're quoting somebody, it's going to be in quotation marks because you're quoting them. You'll note that when you use quotation marks, there's a particular formatting for it, and when you read something like this, you're going to notice that the terminal punctuation is within the quotation marks. However, when you're quoting a resource, and it'll be discussed here, but when you're quoting a resource and you're going to use a citation, there is no terminal punctuation here unless what you're using what you have here is a question mark or an exclamation point. And this is explained more in quoting your sources, but essentially, if you were to take this sentence that would have had a period right here, and you're going to give it to me, you'd put quotation marks around the whole thing, and then you would take that period and put it over here instead of here. This right here, I would suggest you use the word italics. I would suggest that you use italics here instead of putting quotation marks around this. The ellipses, like the dash, basically creates a pause, and it's often used in literature to show somebody trailing off and things like that. However, we also use the ellipses for demonstrating editing. For example, you had a very long sentence, such as this right here, and you want to trim it down to just a few words. You can use the ellipses to basically show where the words were taking out, but you are going to make sure that you do not change the meaning of the word, of the words, or the meaning of that quoted sentence. In other words, you could not take out the word "not" and therefore change a negative to a positive. You still have to create a sentence that is essentially what the author intended to say. And then, of course, you would use this like a dash here to add a little bit of emphasis here. The parentheses are used for two things. One is to clarify a term, a specialized term in which you clarify words like this. And also, obviously, for our essays, you're using it for citation. You're putting those citations in parentheses. You're not using brackets, you're using parentheses. Brackets are actually part of the editing thing. In fact, the ellipses thing and the brackets thing are two parts of editing. Where ellipses shows where you took stuff out, brackets show where you put something in. And so, for example, we take the same quotation that I've been using here, this one right here, Jones note that Socrates' philosophies held astronomy in check. If you wanted to say Socrates' name here in the lead-up sentence, you would then change the word Socrates to the word his. Again, you're not changing the meaning here. You're just making your sentence feel more natural. And also, the idea of for instead of saying for nearly 2,000 years, you could say for about 1,900 years, which would be more accurate, specifically in terms of the number. What you're doing with brackets is that you're inserting a word that clarifies the quotation or makes it fit into your own sentence. These types of things are all formatting issues and usually don't create major problems with sentence structure. What creates problems with sentence structure are semicolons and commas. Semicolons are used sparingly. They are like periods. They separate independent clauses, but actually what they do is they connect two sentences. And in English, they are designed to take two ideas that are linked to each other, especially one that's a relationship that's cause and effect, and to put the two sentences together, but they both must be complete sentences. For example, I'm hungry, semicolon, I want a sandwich. In other words, the hunger leads to the sandwich. It was cold, we put on our jackets. The putting on the jackets is a result of the cold. The semicolon here adds these two things together.
For people who speak Spanish and whose primary language is Spanish, Spanish does not use semicolons. What Spanish would do actually is it would use a comma here and would use a comma here. And unfortunately, if you do the same thing in English, you're creating a comma splice. So if you've been blessed with understanding more than one language, something other than English, and you struggle with the notion of comma splices, you keep getting this mark that you're creating comma splices, and that is discussed in another section of the grammar section here. What you probably need to be doing is taking those commas and putting semicolons when you have a sentence here and a sentence here. The only other use for the semicolon, by the way, is also rare. It's when you're separating items in a list in which the items themselves have commas. So basically, if you say, I have an uncle, a grandmother, and a cousin, and you wanted to add description to those things, you would then use semicolons between the items, between the uncle and the grandmother and the cousin, because you have commas as lead-ups to the word uncle, you have commas as lead-ups to grandmother, and you have commas as lead-ups to cousins. So what you're going to do is you're going to use semicolon here and semicolon here because of this kind of list. This is the only other use for semicolon. The vast majority of the time, it's to basically create this type of complex sentence in which you have two independent clauses connected with the semicolon. Commas are the most abused and misused of the punctuation marks. In fact, I just said that right there. It's very important that you understand how commas are used, and for most people, they need to understand when to have a reason to use them and to otherwise leave them out. The main uses of commas are this fairly long list, and I'll get to a really brief discussion of what commas are about right now. The deal is that the first thing is that you have two sentences. The road was long, and then you have the phrase the day was hot, and you want to put it together. And instead of using just a comma by itself, which would create a comma splice, you use a comma with a conjunction, and, but, or. And so you would have the road was long and the day was hot. It does not mean you use a comma every time you use the word and. You only use a comma with the word and or but or if what's on both sides of that word is a complete sentence. Likewise, if you start a sentence with if, when, while, during, where, etc., these adverbial phrases that create subordinate clauses, you need a comma after that subordinate clause, and then what follows is a complete sentence. And so you would say, if you like soda, comma, try Dr. Pepper. Because of the drought, comma, I wasn't allowed to wash my ferret. For more information, comma, see your handbook or consult your instructor. People create fragments when they put a period here because that makes this into a fragment. When you begin a sentence with one of these words, if, for, where, when, while, etc., you are creating the necessity for a comma somewhere in your sentence. By the way, this does not mean that if you were to switch this around that you'd use a comma. If your sentence was, try Dr. Pepper if you like soda, there is no comma. It's only when the word, that if word, begins the sentence. Basically, adjective clauses are phrases that are stuck in the middle of a sentence and could be taken out of the sentence, and there's commas on both sides. For example, if you said, my friend who is a doctor was in college for 12 years, you could have a sentence that says, my friend was in college for 12 years. The phrase who is a doctor just adds more information, and therefore you would want commas there. Sarah, comma, who lives in Chicago is Kelsey's best friend. Sarah is Kelsey's best friend is a sentence. The phrase who lives in Chicago describes Sarah. Sometimes this whether or not you put commas here is optional, because if you were to leave the commas out of this one, the sentence would have a slightly different meaning, and it's a little complex, but here's the gist of it. If you have the commas in there, you're simply adding information about your friend. If you take the commas out and the sentence was, my friend who was a doctor was in college for 12 years and there was no commas, you'd be saying my friend who is a doctor as opposed to my other friends who are not doctors was in college for 12 years. It would be as if you're talking to somebody who knows several of your friends by their occupation, and you're explaining that the one who was a doctor was in college for 12 years. The other reasons for using it is when you begin a sentence with an introductory phrase that is all by itself. These right here create introductory phrases, but you wouldn't start a sentence with the if and then put a comma, or when and you put a comma. But words like however, for instance, furthermore, on the other hand, consequently, those phrases are all offset from the entire sentence by commas. Something that's kind of linked to the adjective phrase is another phrase that basically explains what this is but doesn't use the word who or that or what. In this case, we also have the items in a series. You know, I have a toad, comma, a rock, comma, and a squeegee. If you're using APA formatting, you have to put the comma here. MLA formatting tells you the comma is optional. So in most of these, I did not include the comma, but on this one, I did. Basically, just be consistent. Either always put the comma between the last two items, or don't put the comma between the last two items. But like I said, if you're doing APA, they want the comma between all of the items in a list of 3 or more. And then here's some not but phrases and gerund phrases in front of a quotation, obviously, unless this is a complete sentence. If this is a complete sentence, you need a semicolon or a period. Otherwise, if it's just a lead-in that is that basically is just a phrase, it's a fragmentary phrase, use a comma here. And then we have a few other miscellaneous things here. Understand that for most people, they're using either no commas at all, which is not helpful, or they're using way too many. And certainly knowing when to having a reason for using it, other than you paused if you said the sentence out loud, is a good way to go. And if you look at the list and say to yourself, "Why am I using this comma?" You should have a reason for it. The reason I tell you not to say the sentence out loud and decide where the comma is that while many people do naturally speak with breaks and pauses where commas and other punctuation would go, the reality is that some people speak with no pause whatsoever, no inflection whatsoever, and other people pause and inflect all the time, either to take a breath or because of the nature of their speech pattern. And using that as a reason to put a comma in a sentence is unreliable. So have an actual reason for using commas. Have an actual reason for using semicolons or periods. And the more you know about punctuation, these very basic, simple things, the less likely you're going to create sentence problems, and your work will not only be clearer to the reader, but also you will not be impacted by grammar marks on your paper that would otherwise be a good, solid paper. So keep working on it. Practice is always going to help you to master these types of things. And the more you practice writing, the same as the more you practice, your sports or your musical instrument or whatever it happens to be, the better you're going to get at it. And certainly the same thing goes for writing. So the more you read and the more you practice this stuff, the more it'll become second nature to you. All right? Stay in touch.